everyone. I am Reverend Carrie Nicewonder. I am the Senior Minister at Emmanuel Congregational Church in Hartford, a member of the Board of Directors for the Southern New England Conference, and the chair of this committee, the Faith in Our Future Together Committee. So I want to welcome you here today. And I would love for us to start with a reflection that was written by Jack Perkins Davidson. He wrote it back in 2018. But I think it speaks to why we are here today. So I'm going to start by sharing with you his words. The church's foundation was literally rotting out from underneath itself, as the story goes. The church had built its sanctuary in the 1800s without a basement to make sure that they would never be tempted to illegally hide escaped slaves. It was a reaction against their Underground Railroad Congregationalist neighbors. So the beams of their wooden New England church sat in the damp soil for about 150 years until it got so bad that the church had to undertake a multi-million-dollar campaign to reconstruct its very foundation, this time with a basement. In Luke 6, Jesus uses the image of a building's foundation to explain the interplay of word and deed. According to his analogy, your solid foundation comes more from your action than from your proclamation. If you're just paying Jesus lip service without anything to back it up, well then watch out when the proverbial floodwaters hit, because the building will not hold. Part of the problem is that the foundations of our denomination were laid when Jim Crow laws were the norm. The foundations of our denomination were laid when being gay was a felony offense. The foundations of our denomination were laid when DDT was a commonly used pesticide. As a result, some of the support beams holding up our church have been sitting in the damp soil of bigotry, pollution, and sin. Those beams are in desperate need of replacing. No matter how well-intentioned we may be as individuals, no matter how many historical firsts we claim, no matter how far we have progressed, our structure is still in need of a new basement. We commit to making God's love and justice real by loving our neighbors, children, and all of creation through our collective work, such as seeking racial, economic, environmental, and LGBTQ justice. That's a line from the mission statement of the conference. And that statement there, that's a different kind of foundation. That's not your typical unwelcoming, dank church basement. That's a foundation that makes room for refugees of all kinds, with sanctuary for the immigrant and affirmation for the trans teen, where Black lives matter and money changers' tables are overturned, accessible to each person's physical or mental needs, and sustainably carbon neutral for all creation. That is God's love. That is God's justice. That's what God's realm looks like. And the mission statement calls on us to make it a reality, to create a glimpse of heaven here on earth, because it is not enough to just pay Jesus lip service. We've got to back it up by doing the work. It's time to dig a new foundation together. Jack wrote those words a few years ago before pandemic struck, but this pandemic made it even more apparent how much structural racism has rotted the foundation of our denomination, our country, our world. The program that we are talking about today seeks to address that reality, to address the dual pandemic of white supremacy and COVID-19, to help us build new foundations, addressing those pandemics through our faith in God and the work of the church together. And so I invite us now to pray together. Loving Creator, you are here among us. You're calling us to do a new thing, to build new foundations, to create justice in your world. And you are even equipping us to do that. And so we give you thanks. We give you thanks that you can and will work in and through us to build new foundations, new ways of living your love, your justice, your peace. We come to you in repentance for the ways that our denomination has engaged in racism and white supremacy, and repentance for the ways that those of us who are white have done that as well. And we come to you knowing that you call us to more, to better, to change. And we come to you asking that you bless our churches, that we can do better. Be with us during this time. Open our hearts and our minds to you. Be with our congregations, with the ways that our churches seek to do your ministry. And be with this meeting, that we might all learn and grow and hear what it is you would have us hear. For the glory of your church and for the work that is to be done among us. In your name we pray. Amen. So we are going to assume and hope that you have all had the program description and the FAQ document and that you've had a chance to read them. So we're not going to just go right back through those documents, but instead right now I'm going to invite the members of our committee to introduce themselves, and then we'll open it up for questions. And as we do our own introductions, we invite you to do your introductions virtually. So we ask that you type your name and your congregation's name in the chat as we do our introductions. So Allison, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Carrie. I am the Reverend Allison Buttrick Patton. I am pastor at Saugatuck Congregational Church, United Church of Christ in Westport, Connecticut, down in the southwest corner in Fairfield County.
Thanks. Alice?
Greetings, I am Alice Turner. I am a member of the Liberty Christian Center, UCC, for over 30 years, and we are in North Hartford, Connecticut.
Thanks. Charlie?
Hello, I'm Charlie Kuchenbrod, Executive Associate Conference Minister, serving the Southern New England Conference.
Thanks. Dan?
Dan Smith, First Church in Cambridge and Harvard Square, Massachusetts.
Thanks. Danik?
I am the Reverend Dr. Donique McIntosh. I am the Minister for Racial Justice for the Southern New England Conference.
And Irene? So Irene, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Hello, I'm Irene Hope. I'm a member of the Beneficent Congregational Church in downtown Providence. We are a welcoming and multicultural church.
Great. Well, welcome to everybody who is here, and thank you so much for including your names in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and open up our time just for questions and just sort of having an informal time of answering the questions that you have about the program. There is the Q&A button down on the side. I think, Charlie, is it correct that it would be down on the right-hand side below the screen?
Yes, you look for Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen in most cases. If you click on that, that will open a box very similar to a chat box that you'll be able to see. You'll be able to add questions, and you will also be able to upvote a question. If you have a question and you see something just like it, rather than typing in the same question, you can upvote that, which will move it towards the top of the list so that we don't need to repeat questions. So we are in a webinar format, not a regular Zoom meeting. So you're seeing the panelists. We're using the Q&A feature to keep things organized. If we need to, we can open things up so that people can talk as well. But we're hoping that you'll add your questions to the Q&A box.
Okay, so as we wait for the questions to come in, we do have the program priorities, and I want to just remind you of those one more time, that the first program priority is to make God's love and justice real, and that priority is reflective of the priorities of the Southern New England Conference. So if you look back over who we declared ourselves to be as a conference, those are the priorities and what we want to fund. The second priority is new approaches to mission and ministry. And the third one is interdependence. So keeping those priorities in mind, we hope you have some questions about how this grant will work and why we're doing it. So we do have a question from Reverend Sarah Smith. Within the application form, how may we include a diagram of what we are dreaming? I am not a tech person, so that's you, Charlie.
You'll see an application form that you can fill out online, and that only covers certain questions. It asks for attachments. You can create additional attachments and email them to Carrie, and we will collect them all as part of your application. So you're not limited to what you can put into the little boxes on the application form. That's a starting point, and you can add additional materials.
Okay, the next question we have is on the grant application. How full does the committee want our answers to the questions you pose to be? Anybody else on the committee have an answer?
I would say enough so that we can make an informed assessment of your program. So don't be afraid to add the information you think we need to make decisions.
I'd also add that we tried to keep this application as manageable as possible. It would have been counterproductive, you might say, to have asked people who are in the midst of a pandemic and carrying so much weight already to have an application that was overly burdensome. So you can bear that in mind as well. I think that we're not looking for pages and pages and pages. I think that's fair to say, but others feel free to jump in.
I will say it's helpful for me to hear some of your stories as part of the application. Stories of ministry and stories of your visioning really do make a difference. So including those stories as well as just sort of the factual information is helpful as well. Oh, I've got some more. Can our proposal include community partners with the church, like food distribution groups or advocacy organizations?
Oh, definitely. We want to know what you have been doing in the community and how you have been spreading your word and your work. And that's very important.
Would it be possible to hear from Ellen what she's talking about?
Sure, hold on just a second. Ellen, if you turn on your microphone, we'll be able to hear you.
Okay. I can't see myself, so, okay. I thought something was wrong at first. No, we have a small congregation of mostly elderly people, but we do maintain good connections with the food team in Chelsea, which I'm part of the pandemic response team. So there's a huge amount of organization there. And I mean, I haven't thought up exactly what a proposal would look like, but to me, if I were to dream a little, there's huge potential to help in a very hurting place using our community partnerships. And so I just wanted to know that that's okay, that if, I don't know, I picture either, well, I don't know, I have to think about it. But we have, it's a small city and there's just huge links. And if I were to actually reach out to some of the city leaders and even the city manager and say, how can our church help Chelsea more? And here are 3 of my ideas. I would get really good advice, and I would get people willing to help out. But my membership itself is willing and open, but most are actually elders and, you know, at risk. We would need help, in other words, from our community partners to implement any idea.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. That was helpful to get more clarification on that. And I think what we can say is, you know, one of the 4 priorities of the conference is working with community partners. So that clearly fits within what we're talking about. So we've had a few more questions come in. So I want to keep, so one is a practical question, it looks like, from Sarah. I've opened the link for the application right now. How may we access it after today?
I think you can keep it open until to add on to it until you click submit. I don't know that we're sophisticated enough to allow you to save and reopen an application. Let me find out about that, and I will post additional instructions along with the application about submitting it. But one way is to just keep it open on your browser until you're done and then hit submit. I'll find out more and post.
Do we have the link for the application on the website as well, right, Charlie?
Yes.
Okay, so it would be available on the website too. From Katie, the grants program has a huge focus on racial justice, as it should. Should white churches that are looking for church growth in a vague way, so not explicitly around cultural diversification, apply? Does anyone want to answer? So I can say, from my perspective, because this grant program is looking at the intersection of dual pandemics, of racism and COVID-19, that if your grant does not address racial justice or injustice, then I'm not going to be excited about it. But that's also because I'm not going to be excited about any church that isn't engaging issues of justice or racial justice. I think that is what all of our churches are called to do. So I would hope that church growth for you would actually mean that too. And if you could have that as a part of your visioning and your dreaming, there would still be resonance with it. But if there's an application for me that doesn't include a racial justice lens, then that's not going to be compelling to me, because I really believe that's what the church is called to be right now. And we want to fund living into the church, as I believe, as I think our denomination and our conference believes it's called to be.
Carrie, Annie Cheatham, I hope I've pronounced that right, has a follow-up question. Can you see that in the question and answer box about
Yeah.
racial diversity?
Our church is located in the hill towns of Western Mass, in the poorest county in the whole conference. However, our communities are not racially diverse. They're economically diverse, however. And we're interested in linking with a racially diverse congregation in Springfield. Is that the sort of collaboration you're looking for, or are churches like ours not going to be considered? Okay, I am hesitant to be the only one addressing this. What I would say is it really isn't about the population of the congregation. It's about the engagement and the justice work. So racial justice work is not for congregations of color or congregations that are diverse exclusively. Racial justice work is very much for white congregations. So if that justice lens is there, if it's a congregation that is engaging in justice, and it sounds like it is, it sounds like you are trying to make those connections. That's exciting, like that's important. So this isn't about just funding congregations of color, but the intersection of racism and COVID-19 means that our congregations need to be addressing racism, and our white congregations are certainly called to do that. I see Allison and Danik both have their mics off, so I'm Danik.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, while I understand raising the question, it's often difficult to try to come up with a like a sort of one size fits all, kind of answer without having an actual application, in front of us that we can look at. But having said that, I would say, if you look at the criterion and you look at the values of the conference, if you feel like the work that you're doing or interested in doing lines up with that, then we invite you to submit an application and we'll, assess it on those merits. Again, it's just difficult without having an actual application. Like it's just your question is theoretical right now, and without having an actual application where we can say, oh, they have this, this, and this, it's just difficult to try to come up with a one size fits all answer.
I see a question regarding rounds of funding. We don't know how long it will take us to receive and process enough applications to exhaust the funds that are available. If we made $50,000 grants, we would be making 20 of them. We don't know if we'll receive 20 applications that are worthy in the first round or not. So I would encourage people who are interested to apply as early as possible. We cannot predict the future. It may be that we go to additional rounds of applications depending on the responses we receive in this first round. It's been a little difficult to assess interest. And there's been an explosion of registrations for this event just in the last 24, 48 hours, which is heartening to us. But that as a show of interest.
Okay, so that, Charlie, you were just answering Rodney's question. The next question from Barry: how much will the program focus on covenant relationships between the congregations accepted into the program and the conference, as opposed to primarily providing grants to congregations that will work independently of each other? I really like that question. Because we had talked very much about the relationship between the conference and the congregations getting these grants. But I don't think we'd talked a lot about the relationship between the congregations getting the grants. And I think that's really interesting. So I don't have an answer for that because we hadn't really talked about it, but I think it's a great idea. So I don't know, does anyone else have a response?
We haven't talked about it. Go ahead, Allison.
I'm just going to say, I like the possibility of connecting the congregations with each other. I think if I was participating, I would find that appealing and exciting. So I think it bears exploring.
Yeah, I could imagine it being helpful to have once we know who is awarded the grants, having a cohort almost. Yeah. That we'd be checking in with and invite y'all to check in with each other, especially if there are some shared goals or shared experiences.
So Carrie and Charlie, we have Cleo posting a question in the chat. I don't know if you've seen that concerns the timing and the range of funds. And maybe Charlie, you had actually partially addressed that just now.
Yeah, I would also say, Cleo, in terms of other resources, our plan for moving ahead is when we identify a applicant that we want to work with, we'll make a preliminary award, and then we will sit down and work out a covenantal partnership agreement that will further describe what's being funded and what additional conference resources from staff or otherwise may be available to assist as the conference accompanies congregations through this process. We're hoping very much to provide more than just dollars to churches as they move ahead and try to resolve the disruptions caused by the twin pandemics and move forward with greater strength.
Thanks for that. We have a few more questions here in the Q&A. The application asks for what we're doing to reduce expenses. May we also add the group of additional expenses we now have due to COVID? That is something we'd like considered too. I think that would be a yes, right?
Yes,
Amy.
we're trying to kind of understand the extent of your financial distress as one thing to consider as part of your application. So yes, it didn't occur to us to address additional expenses, but that is a reflection of the challenges that you're facing.
And then the next question I see, so just to clarify, the grant funds would cover potential structural building changes or a vehicle or other thing apart from the building, or even personnel who would help achieve a particular plan. Yeah, and we've talked about that in depth, that if it is a structural, if it's a building change, if it's a personnel change, if it's something along those lines, that moves the congregation towards achieving its mission, then that would be consistent with what we want to fund. Anything else to add? Then we have Cleo's question here, and I think we did answer Cleo's question. If you have more, just go ahead and, how are predominantly Black churches expect to participate in racial justice when the congregation itself is most likely the subject of racial injustice? I think, you know, that goes to, I can't remember who was saying it, but these applications are evaluated individually for the congregations as the congregations are. And so there are congregations who are very much impacted by racial injustice or legacy of white supremacy. And that informs our decision very much. And congregations of color are congregations who are impacted by that. And that has a real financial and economic impact. And we know that. So that would be a different evaluation than a congregation where it's predominantly white, and we're saying, where is the work you're doing on racial justice? Donique, I see your mic is off.
Yeah, I also just want to say that part of part of the aim of the program is not just about individual congregations doing sort of like anti-racist work. It's also about a recognition that as a conference, we have not always provided access in terms of financial resources to congregations of color. And so there might not always necessarily need to be an explicit anti-racist focus for a particular congregation, given the racial demographics of that congregation. I think, again, part of it is about you all looking at that criterion and aligning the work with what's listed there, and then providing enough information, you know, for us to be able to make an informed decision about the work that that you all would be interested in doing. But there also are other ways that Black congregations can do racial justice oriented work. It could just be looking inward, or it could be partnering with a local organization, you know, that might be doing work with, I'm making this up, you know, but like doing work with youth in the community or something. So there are ways that it can be done. It just wouldn't be anti-racist in the same way that a white congregation would be engaged in.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Is it fair to say, and does it, this may just reiterate things that are already being lifted up, but part of the point is that we are aspiring to be anti-racist in our process. So we're interested in supporting and resourcing, which is, as Donique just said, those that need resources. But as we are, just as we're asking you to look through that lens, we as a committee are using that same lens for evaluating how we as a conference can support churches in a way that's anti-racist.
Great, thank you. Our next question, it looks like conference values emphasize seeking racial, economic, and LGBTQ justice. But is the key to these grants a demonstration of our seeking primarily racial justice? This grant is a response to the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and racism. And so I do think there is a primary focus on racial justice. That does not mean that the other aspects of our justice work don't intersect. They do very, very much. So we would highly value the intersection of those justice issues. But I would open that up to other committee members as well. Do other people have comments on that?
I would say that if your congregation has been particularly hard hit by the pandemic, this grant may be for you. And if you're not sure about the racial justice piece, maybe the grant is for you in a way that it is a prompt for you to think about what you could do or how you can be more engaged in racial justice to address the dual or the twin pandemic. But I don't. I just want to underscore that it's the impetus for this has come from two different places. The pandemic response being one, and so if you're in a place where you're just really hurting because of the pandemic, and you haven't thought as much about the racial justice piece, I think that's okay. But use this to help you to think more about the racial justice piece and say how you're gonna address that. If you're more in the place where you are interested in growing a racial justice ministry or something like that, and maybe not as impacted by the pandemic, I think that's okay too. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody on the committee, if I overstated something there, but
the way I've
both
experienced, the way I've experienced these last few months, the pandemic has compelled us to be and do church differently. So it's a struggle. It's also an invitation. And I think we're trying to lean into that invitation at a moment when we already need to do church differently. When that's hard, but also perhaps spark some creativity. Why not ask if we need to reimagine church, what might that look like, and how do we incorporate the very best of our convictions in that reimagined church?
Okay, we'll keep going. And the next question is still along the same lines of, I'm still a little confused from reading the information. I got the impression that the grants were particularly targeted to relieving financial stress for congregations whose assets may have been hindered by systemic racism over time. Now I'm hearing more about the grants are more focused on supporting racial justice work more generally, even in predominantly white congregations. Could you please comment and clarify? Also, if the focus is primarily the former, have you considered accepting churches into the program that may not apply for the grant? Just a thought. Does anyone on the group want to reply to that?
I'm not sure I understand the second part. Accepting churches into the program that may not apply for the grant. Does somebody else understand that?
I did it.
Barry, could you clarify that second part of the question at least?
Barry, if you unmute, you'll be able to speak to the.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this goes back to some degree, I guess, with the question I was posing before about the possibility of a covenanting between churches that are involved in this. So this may be sort of out of line of what the purpose is, and I would fully accept that. So I'm not trying to squeeze something into the program that doesn't fit. But my question there was, if the program is more in supporting congregations of color, and I've heard different responses to that question, is there the possibility of a church that doesn't necessarily need the money, but that wants to work on racial justice and be part of a program that is focused on that, recognizing that other congregations may need those assets more, but still wanting to work in a relationship? So that may be changing the program, and we can certainly, actually, I talked with Donique a few days ago, and I know that there are possibilities of working with resourcing from the conference without necessarily being part of this program. So I'm not trying to say this is the only way to do that, but that was just my question. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that definitely clarifies it. Thank you. And again, I think somewhat because we hadn't thought about that cohort model right until we got your question. I don't think we have an answer to that question unless anybody else, I don't have an answer to that question. Does anybody? The first part of the question, I think we may be able to answer a little bit though.
My only wonderment in terms of how another congregation might be drawn in. There's a primary congregation that's applying for the grant, but then you want to partner with another congregation, if I'm understanding the question correctly. I wonder, and this is sort of a question to the committee for us to continue to contemplate, whether that's something that we address during the covenanting stage. So if you bring the proposal to us and say this proposal would involve this partner, then I think ideally you would be in conversation with that partner while you're developing the grant. I would imagine that might make sense. But if there's something further to clarify, that might happen at that second stage where we're developing the covenant together once we've said that this is a grant that makes sense to explore. Does anybody else want to chime in on that? But in terms of process, that struck me.
I'm nodding, but yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me.
Great. And I think for the first part of the question, that it is both, that the grants are targeted towards relieving financial stress for congregations whose assets have been hindered by systemic racism over time, and that the grants would also be available to support racial justice work more generally, even in predominantly white congregations. I think we've talked about both of those things. Donique, do you have something to add?
Nope, I was just saying I agree.
Okay, good. Okay, so we have a question from Val. Will the process be interactive? If you find we left out a special financial or part of a question, will you reach out to the church for more or completed information? I think
Yes.
it's, yeah. We've discussed that we will have to have personal conversations with people along the way too. We can't get a whole picture of a church just from paper as well. And certainly we would follow up. Does anyone have anything else to add?
Yeah, and having said that, please work to complete as much of it as, as possible. I mean, it's part of why we have the FAQ, you have the application, we're doing this session, we can't, while we certainly want to be open and make sure that we're taking everything into consideration, we also don't have the bandwidth to have, like lengthy conversation with every applicant, who might not have included something in the application.
Okay, Matthew is writing, as my congregation considers this grant, I think this is an invitation to how God is calling us to be in the world. That is something that takes time and prayerful discernment. If our church still needs more time after the January 15th deadline, it seems from the materials that there is a possibility that churches could apply after January 15th if there is still funds left. Though as the document says, that can't be guaranteed. When would that possibility be decided and announced? Thanks. So we will, our goal is to announce the grants on February 15th. Is that correct? I think we had that as a goal. So at that point, I would imagine we would know how much, if any, funding is available. It's simply that we have this amount of funds. If we have more available after the first round, then a second round would be opened up. If that's not correct, Charlie, does that make sense? Rodney is asking, the pandemic has caused us to, oh, I just lost Rodney. Where are you? Maybe his question was deleted. Okay. Charlie, are you seeing Rodney's question?
No, it did
Okay, just
pop
delete
away. I believe the question was about funding improved technology for being in the online world. And if that's part of your plan to move forward with strength from the pandemic, yes. There's a question from David Jones about the recoverable part of the grant. The idea is that this program in the fullness of time will make the entire conference stronger, not just the church that is helped, so that part of the covenant would be repayment by the church at some point in the future if they are able to do so, depending on their circumstances. So there's no requirement to repay. There won't be a promissory note, but we might have covenantal agreements that if the church receives a large new source of funds from a bequest, if the church sells property or otherwise has additional resources available, that some of that may be returned to the conference so that we could fund other future ministries and continue to keep the entire conference strong. So I would suggest that you not be worried about an inability to repay when you're making the application, where it's not a loan, where it's recoverable grant might be an awkward term for some, and I understand that, but it's this idea that repayment according to your ability and circumstances.
Charlie, at one point you said think of it like paying it forward.
Yes.
That was helpful.
Right. Our next question is just curious, where do these funds come from? Charlie, do you want to answer that?
Sure. The historic conferences in Connecticut and Massachusetts have some unrestricted funds that have been functioning as endowment. We have been using this money to invest and generate income for supportive conference activities, and the boards decided that circumstances were such that we should consider spending this money rather than maintaining it in an endowment. So it's coming from accumulated assets from the historic conferences.
And then we have the question, is an introductory narrative summary helpful to the committee? Something like an overview statement of what the congregation hopes for. I would think so. To me, that would be very helpful. Okay. And then there's a question from Gail Martin down at the bottom that apparently came in quite a while ago, and I think I just missed. Please clarify the most recently completed fiscal year 2019 or 2020.
I can do that. Most churches, their fiscal year matches the calendar year, so that their most recent full year ended December 31st, 2019. Some churches run from July 1 to June 30. Some run from April 1 to March 30. So whatever your fiscal year is, the most recent one that's completed, whether it was December 31 or March 31 or June 30, that's what we're looking for as your most recent set of financials.
Okay. So looking at the screen, it looks to me like we've answered the questions that are on here. If there are any questions we did not answer, please make sure to just re-enter them. But at this point, it looks like we've answered all the ones that have come in. Okay. So we'll go ahead and probably close pretty shortly, but I do want to open it up and find out if any of the panelists have anything else they want to add. Danique?
Yeah, I would just, I sense that there's some, hesitation and question out there about some of the pieces of it. I would just encourage people to, again, look at the criterion that's listed there and not let fear be the thing that guides you in your decision making as it relates to applying. Put it out there, and let us look at it and consider it and see what happens.
Yeah, I would agree with Danique's comment as well. I think it's important, someone said it earlier, that churches actually use this time, or congregations use this time, to think about their ministry and think about their work, and know that there isn't one right answer, but it's really an opportunity for you to be innovative and for you to think about ministry in different ways, and don't eliminate yourself because you think you're not qualified. I also believe that both Danique and Charlie are available if you have questions and need to discuss something, that they may be available to have that conversation with you.
I would add, we are trying to do a new thing. This is something the conference has not ever done before. And so we are learning as we go along. We are interested in feedback. We hope to be able to further clarify and sharpen our perspective on this as we go forward. But to the extent, if you're frustrated with a little that you sense some ambiguity, please forgive us and know that we are trying to break new ground, and it's a risk you take when you do something new. Anita asked about a transcript. We were not planning on transcribing this conversation. We are recording it. We will post it online, so you'll be able to go back and re-listen, and hopefully, if you're looking for something specific, find that in the recording.
Wonderful. I think that is it for the questions and answers and for the comments. So if the panelists are all good, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Charlie and Danique for their work on this program coming into being. And we really look forward to reading about your churches and about the ministry that you are doing. So thank you all, and blessings on your ministries.